Welcome to the Qualitalks podcast, a podcast for GMP and life sciences leaders who want fewer surprises during inspections and fewer delays getting products to patients. I'm Jan Kugel, the managing director at Qualistory, and today we are talking about one of the most frustrating bottlenecks in life sciences manufacturing, tech transfer. We'll unpack why they are still painfully slow, where the major gaps are, and what actually helps close them. We'll get practical about the data foundations, GMP ware execution, and where AI can save time without creating compliance risks. My guest today is Nikki Bishop, who brings a practical perspective from the intersection of software, automation, customer success, and life sciences manufacturing. Started her career as a process control engineer. Now she is the vice president of marketing and experience at Emerson's Delta V for life sciences. Emerson is a global leader in automation technology and industrial software, providing solutions that help life sciences manufacturers optimize operations, enhance efficiency, and ensure regulatory compliance. With a focus on digital transformation, Emerson enables smarter, data driven decision making to drive productivity, quality, and sustainable growth in highly regulated industries. And being part of this organization places Nikki in a unique position to provide valuable insights into this topic. So let's get into it. Nikki, welcome to the show. I'm very happy to have you with me today.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, very excited to dive into this topic with you. And before we dig in, maybe we'll start with the small background about where you're coming from and how did you find your path to Emerson and what exactly you're involved at the moment, and maybe a bit why we chose this interesting topic of tech transfer today.
Yeah, great. So you mentioned it in my intro. I started my career off as a process control engineer. Actually, right out of college, I went to Georgia Tech, and my first job out of college was at Emerson. So, um, been with the company quite a while, and started out very much in the weeds of process control and automation, and building out Delta V structures for quite a while. Did quite a bit of work in the projects organization, which I loved. I always like to say I started my career out in steel-toed boots and hard hats and insights, and that really hands-on experience. Also did some life sciences batch controls during that time, which was great. And I mean that technical foundation is invaluable. I'll say that now. My current role, vice president of marketing and customer experience for our life sciences software, I get to focus on building digital solutions and software for life sciences manufacturing. So still very connected to Delta V Batch, which is kind of where I started out. So it's been a really fun kind of full circle. But I've pretty much spent my time in software throughout my whole career, whether it was building, scalable applications is my time in process control. I worked for Siemens Software for quite a bit, and been at startup Seek for a little while as well. So always been in this software space, even before software was cool, is what I like to say. But super exciting now to have an impact on. I think you mentioned it too in the intro, but have an impact for patients. Right, that's what excites me every day. We call our team Lifesavers, which can sound a little hokey, but it's really wrapped around our purpose. Why do we do what we do? Why do we get up every day and do the things that we do? And it's to help our life sciences industry move forward. I'm a bit of a junkie in reading all of the things I can get my hands on, the latest, greatest, drug discovery and cures and clinical trial research. And none of that works if you can't manufacture the thing you've discovered. And so we pour all of our energy and passion in making sure that these amazing discoveries that are coming out can make it through manufacturing and get to those patients. So when you mentioned tech transfer as a topic for this one, our ears and eyes lit up on that one because it's such a difficult process, and there's so much room for optimization. I think anybody who has been in that process or been a part of it, whether it's a 2-year or 12-year process, understands that there's so much room for
Right,
opportunity to
right.
optimize.
Right.
Yeah.
And why do you think it's so critical at this point also to talk about? So, tech transfer has been there forever. It's part of the process for manufacturing when they expand their manufacturing overseas or just want to expand their manufacturing to different sites. What has been um, relevant at this point that you think, you know what, I think it matters now to talk about it more than ever?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about tech transfer, it represents every challenge that's in human nature, every challenge that's in the technology landscape, every challenge that we face in a regulated environment, all wrapped into one. Because it's not only humans that need to communicate with one another, which we know from the beginning of time has been a challenge of how do you get human communication going across even within the same region, but cross regions, right? Cross time zones. People have different styles of communicating. There's that factor. There's the technical challenge too of how do you physically transfer or digitally transfer what one side is doing. And somebody may be doing it on paper. They've got stacks and stacks of paper. Someone else is, digitizing. And so the technical logistics of how do you transfer that information comes into play. And then we have the regulated environment where we can't just push the limits all the time. We have to think about, is there an audit trail, right? Do we have this captured? Can we go back and verify, the decisions that we've made? So if you think about that trifecta of human dynamics, technical dynamics, and regulatory dynamics, it's no wonder that tech transfer is so hard.
Right. And besides being hard, it's a very lengthy process, right? So, also from my experience, it can take half a decade, even more, right? And what is the reason for that from your perspective? So, one would think, okay, tech transfer, we have a manufacturing, we just move something that we know, like from A to Z, we already know it, should be easy, right? But it's not. So why is that?
I think, you think it would just be easy, like you have a recipe at home that you're making and somebody wants to make it somewhere else and you would just send it to them and then they would just go in their kitchen and they would make it. And unfortunately, it's not that easy because maybe the person who has the recipe to send doesn't exactly know how they made it the first time. They didn't document it, right? It came out great, right? Think about, cooking at your house. It came out great, but can you really go back and say, every single thing that you did and how you did it and what your oven was like and all of the things so that you could transfer that. And many of the recipes and processes that we're transferring haven't been, well documented or digitized. And like you said, it can take a decade, right, to do this transfer or more. And so you think about all the places where maybe one step wasn't documented and another one was, and you're going back and you're trying to find the person who did that work. They may have retired, they may be at another company. You may not understand what was written down. One page may be missing. It seems like little simple things, but when you transfer that of 1,000 different touch points along the way, it just compounds. If we could all go back and say everything that we're doing in this industry, we're going to document and we're going to digitize and we're going to have this beautiful record that we can then, pass along and digitally audit. But unfortunately, that's not the situation that we're in. So we're playing a bit of catch up now to say, what would we have done if we could do it from scratch? And let's start doing that. And then how do we work ourselves out of the lack of documentation or of tracking that we have in our current recipes?
Right. So would you say then that the main cause of delay results from bad documentation, or not bad but maybe lack of documentation or complicated documentation? So from what you have been saying, it has been revolving a lot about that, right? Not about supplier qualification, or even the building of the facilities, but would you say it's one of the bottlenecks is documentation related, or is it something else?
I would say rather than documentation, I think it's knowledge capture and knowledge
Mhm.
capture in a standard way. Because a document, you could capture it on a document, you could capture it in, a digital record, you can capture it in a database. But where we see challenges, no matter how it's captured, is it standardized? Is there some record that some translation table? Because what was intended isn't necessarily what gets transferred and what gets understood when it gets transferred. I think the best of intentions, when you receive something, you read it and you make your take on it, you understand it, you think you understand it, and you pass it along. It's like the telephone game that we played as a kid. Every time it transfers, there's a little bit something lost or tweaked, and at some point you have to go back and verify that and go through the audit, which just takes time to sort through all of that.
It happens also because many new people involved, right? So they need to learn the process from scratch, and then you need to have the experts who have been part of the process to come to the site to assist and basically pass the knowledge. And it probably also creates some delays and difficulties, right?
And you mentioned facilities. I mean, that's another challenge too, is do we really know what the capability of the facility is that we're transferring to? Do we know everything we need to know? Because once it gets transferred, it, can it be produced there, right? What are the modifications that we need to make? And that takes some time too. If you haven't considered the true specifications of that facility that you're transferring to before you transfer, so that you know what you have to modify, then you're playing catch up, and it just takes time, because maybe that particular facility needs to add a piece of equipment, or maybe they need that piece of equipment is in use for some other process, and so that latency just keeps building.
Right. And you mentioned also understanding the process, right? So uh, from the documentation that has been, whether it is still, uh, up to date. Is it a process that it could have been already um, live and in manufacturing for many years, like 20 years, maybe in another facility. So then you need to track the process again and start, let's say, all over here, right? So what one means by like really understanding the process? Is it only about the molecule to understand it? Is it also how the batches are manufactured, the critical control points? Is it all together, or is it something very specific that is the main bottleneck here?
And I think each stage of the process will have unique needs. You know what? I go back to my process control
Mhm.
days, and from the manufacturing space, you know what you need in that, right? You're to the point of, this equipment needs to do this, and this agitator needs to turn on for this number of seconds and minutes, and this temperature, and it's very much a data driven. You can describe that state, but when you go upstream of that in the process side, it may not be defined in the same way. They need the same degree of detail, but it's a different context. And so when you're transferring from what was a process definition to all the way down to where you're manufacturing and distributing, every time that changes throughout the process, there's different requirements at that stage. And I think that is a lot of what gets missed. If I go back to that process intent, what was the intent here of the predecessor in the process, and how do you translate that into something that makes sense for that particular stage, right? When it's get handed to manufacturing, does the manufacturing person have the manufacturing context that they need to proceed, or are they having to figure it out and go back and ask questions? And even from a process perspective, you can't start with the manufacturing data. There has to be a very molecule driven, how are we producing this, what is the acceptance criteria, and then hand that off to the next stage in the process. But it's that context between parties, which I'll kind of go back to what I said about the human dynamics. You've got a party that has specific needs of what they need. They have an expertise in that particular area. It's getting passed down to a totally different group with a different context, a different expertise, and a different need. So we kind of have to understand what each party needs along the process and design with that in mind, which is also not something we're used to doing. The process engineer and the process designer designs for their needs and hands it off, and then that person figures it out and hands it off. It's building that. How do you build the context in for the next step and the previous step into what you're developing today?
Right. So it's a very complicated process, and that's one of the reasons why it takes so long. And the problem where when it takes so long, sometimes failures happen, and projects that take many years, half a decade to complete, they crash and shatter at the very end. And I've seen it, unfortunately, myself in my career. That the project that we worked many, many years on was shut down because until it was finished, it was not economically viable anymore to have the product manufactured in another site, because there was a competitor that was quicker to the market with another tool, right? So you need to be quicker with this. You need to when you do the tech transfer, you need to know for 100% or 99% that it makes sense to do it, right? And again, you need to be quick to make sure that it doesn't shatter at the end. And have you seen such also occasions in your experience that projects fail, and maybe you could shed light on maybe what were the common causes behind it?
I mean, I think there's always those. I mean, you say that, and it's devastating to hear because obviously there were big plans for whatever that was going to go be manufactured. I think everybody has some of those stories of failures. I think most you can go back and revisit, right, and maybe spend some more time. And I've seen most get through the finish line at some point, unless some major issue came up and it no longer made sense. But you can usually trace it back to some step in the process where something was missed, and it was almost a simple thing that we could have done, right, that we could have understood a little bit better before you got to the end. I think the other piece, and that is sometimes it fails because the market changes. I mean, what we say we're going to do today is going to be very, very different than what happens 5 years, 10 years from now. And so some of it is market timing, which is another challenge that we have, especially as more and more drug candidates are coming out, right, with the discovery process being more AI driven right now. What happens when there's more and more candidates available to go be manufactured? We have to figure tech transfer out much faster.
It's a bit more difficult to predict the market, right? Because technology moves fast, and sometimes you just miss the opportunity. So that, of course, can always happen. But uh, to your point, that you mentioned that sometimes people miss important critical points, which really delay the projects and cause huge delays and uh, step backs, right? So is it again because of data? Is it training? What is the reason for those mishaps?
I think it's all of the above, which is probably not the answer that you wanted. I think it's not just if we had everything documented, it would be perfect. You have to also make sure that parties are communicating. Obviously, digital batch record or digital records and the data and having it to transfer, that's great and that's an ideal, but it doesn't preclude humans from connecting. That still has to happen. You still have to have the human in the loop. So driving closer partnership, driving closer collaboration, asking questions to understand. I think that's all good practice, whether we're using AI or writing things down or sorting through things. It's, are we actually asking all of the right questions to understand the work that I'm doing that is now going to go downstream to someone else so that I can build that into what I'm doing? That communicate. I
Mhm.
mean, I can't stress communication enough, and partnership. When you think about why tech transfer is so critical for us as an industry, it represents a really great opportunity for a true partnership across companies, across providers, across vendors, across AI providers. If we don't have this strong industry partnership and put our heads together to figure out how to solve it, we won't get anywhere because any one party can't solve it.
Right. So communication is key, right? Because there are so many people involved, from the original manufacturing side to the heads of the new manufacturing side, right? So who would you put as the chief communicator there to make sure the right people speak with each other? Would it be like project managers, head of manufacturing?
That's a tough one. Who gets to be the chief communicator? I think part of it is, rather than it being a title, being a competency, getting someone really that is a great collaborator that can see across the whole process and has a depth and breadth of knowledge to understand what's going to be expected at the next step. That might be a manufacturing person who's, you know, been at the manufacturing side of it for many, many years and understands how things flow. It might be a process designer very early in the process who's seen many, many of these, go through the manufacturing process and understands, each one of the steps. But rather than being a title, I would find, it's that competency. Like, who is that good collaborator that you have within the organization, that, the go-to person? Who is it that person that, they call when there's something that needs to be figured out? But baking that into the whole process early on, I think, is critically important. Like a project manager role is the right way to look at it, because it does need to be orderly. We need to say, what is our ultimate goal? Where are the things that could go wrong? How do we plan for them? The staged approach, what happens next? How do we make sure that that one happened? Really the same way that we do auditing and regulatory controls, we almost need to do the same thing for our process to make sure that it's been followed.
And if you're also talking about expedited, so a lot of the problems and project that shatter at the end is, as we said, is a time product, right? So we said, you have a new molecule, so usually it takes it 10 years to get to the market, right? Then you have the tech transfer, so it's another like
Mhm.
half a decade, right? So the point is to expedite it, right? And from my experience, what I've seen in tech transfer projects is a lot of paper, right? So huge amount of paper that needs to be manually reviewed. We had thousands upon thousands of folders that people needed to review, and it's very time consuming. Then you have maybe mistakes, and you need to open deviations, and if something is not signed, you have a problem with auditors later, right? And it's interesting because we are in the digital age, right? But we still use so much paper here, right? So how do we expedite it? If we, get rid of the paper, would it expedite us? Would it make everything easier?
Absolutely. I mean, the hard part is, where do you start, especially for, you're in the middle of a tech transfer and there's a truckload of papers that get shuffled to the next site to get figured out. I think the challenge is just that feeling of overwhelm of, how do we get out of this? Where do we start? There's that concept of go slow to go fast. There is going to be a bit of a lull while we sort through all of the paper and digitize everything and come up with a system where it can be captured digitally. But I think it's absolutely worth it. But recognizing that it can be overwhelming. If you're this is the process, we're used to doing it, everyone's used to doing it this way. Change management is a huge piece of this, because it's one of the human dynamics of, that's how we've always done it, and why would we change? But I mean, I think one of the highest impact ways that we can expedite the process is to move from paper to digital, which sounds crazy to say in 2026, but that we still use so much paper. But I understand, it's how it's always been done. It's a process that, we've defined, but it's absolutely worth it to work yourself out of that paper process. Like, start today, right? Start today and worry about the paper that's already there. But if you just keep delaying it and keep delaying it, you're still building this mountain of paper that you're eventually going to need to sort through.
So I'm sure that there are so many tools that can be validated nowadays, right? So there is no issue with that, right? It might uh, be seemed a bit costly at first, but I think if you consider the human hours that one spends on the files and the documentation and the paper that you need to review, and the archiving that I'm also thinking all those folders, I think companies don't even have sometimes the right um, amount of space, so they outsource the archiving to another company that archives all those folders for them later, right? So when thinking about all those costs and thinking that you can put it on the cloud, it just makes sense, right? So it could be a bit absurd to, not to calculate it in the cost. And you mentioned companies starting, they're in the middle of the project, right? So would you say, even if you're in the middle, just drop everything, digitize, and then continue, and it would still be worth it?
I think it's worth it at any stage. I mean, obviously within reason. You don't want to, if you're
Yeah.
really close, right? I wouldn't abandon it. But I mean, at any stage, it's a worthwhile effort. You have to start somewhere, and you can't go back and, you may not get the opportunity in your career to start from very beginning of defining a process and defining a molecule and moving it through. So start. Like probably my best advice is just start somewhere. And there's so, like you mentioned, there's so many different tools out there, from software packages. There's Excel, right? I mean, like one of there's some very simple tools out there that can be leveraged. It's just a matter of like just start somewhere.
Right. And when thinking about all the documentation, especially if companies are located overseas, and um, I've seen also occasions when one needed to uh, sign a paper and mail it, right, to be signed and either in another land, and which nowadays it should be absurd to do it, but I think it still happens, and it's just crazy to think about it, right? And when we were talking about there are so many documents when you're doing tech transfer or and qualifications and building. So you have like charts, you have designs, you have the process. So can you digitize everything, or some things are a bit difficult to digitize?
I think you can almost digitize everything. I mean, especially with AI tools now that can help, right, with that recognition. I mean,
Mhm.
there's one interesting dynamic in that I'd heard. I don't remember, it was one at an industry event talking to someone, and it was about cursive handwriting and how much of the older records are written in cursive, because that was
Right.
the formal way to write. Right, is like you write in cursive. I mean, I'm a mom of two 20-something kids, and they can read cursive, but they've never been trained in it. So you think about this next generation getting a cursive record that we're going to have to go back and check on. It may or may not be able to be consumed, which is a really interesting take from that. But I think
Mm,
even that can be digitized, right? Whether it's handwritten or they're printed and then filled out. But we have to consider like generational dynamics at play of like what happens in 5 or 10 years when this is still in that tech transfer process and there's really old documentation that's getting pushed along. So I mean, I'm of the mindset of just about anything can be digitized, um, scanned, interpreted, put in some format, especially now. I mean, with the last, let's just say the last 6 months even of AI development and the speed at which it's moving. I realize everything can't go into AI, and will always be a strong advocate of human in the loop with AI. So let me put that out there. But the tools that we have to digitize make that a lot easier.
so how can AI help us? Are we talking about generative AI that we can have a conversation with it, and agentic AI where we, instead of programming, we just ask it to do something, it outputs a dashboard or something like this? Or we are talking about even AI that helps us uh, discuss the documentation that we have, right? So with the database, right? So you have ChatGPT that has all the data that is accessible in the internet, and then you have your own data, right? So you can, instead of browse and look for hours for a document, you can just ask, find this document and summarize this or that. So are we talking about this, or is it even higher in scale?
I think there's both. And typically when you hear AI in industry, you think agentic, autonomous. This agent's going to come in and work on my behalf, which is overwhelming. It sounds cool and futuristic. But if you take that back to the basics, you could consider Excel an AI tool. Not really, right? But building it if you want to digitize something. But there's simple tools that you can use internally, which is I would say AI enablement and not necessarily agentic, everything doing everything for you. But if you're just talking about, digitizing records, paper records that you have, I mean, we've had scanners to scan those in for quite some time at a very simple stage, but how do you actually interpret what's on those and give you a summary? I mean, there's some great tools right now that are available for some of that internal enablement. And I think most people are using those in some way. It just gets a little scary when you start to apply it to our industry, because we do want to be very, very careful of how we apply it and what data that we feed to it, and protect data protection behind firewalls, and all of that has to be considered. but that's gotten a lot better in the last 6 months, 6 to 12 months, I think.
In terms of regulations, are we there that we can use those tools already, or is it still pending?
I think we're getting there, but we're always going to need to be careful. We always have to think it through, whether even for internal tools that we have in our own companies that are in a safe space, that are partitioned, always be mindful, always be mindful. I don't, I hope that our industry doesn't get to a point where everything is always available. And it's, everything's allowable and we don't have those guardrails, because I think we're always going to need those guardrails, because at the other end of everything we do is a human being, right? And their well-being. So, but there's definitely safe spaces to use AI now, training, data protection and wrappers and partitioning your data so that it's not, out in a public model. So there's a lot of ways to manage that now.
And if you could highlight a couple of the most important areas where I could help in the tech transfer, what would it be?
Definitely digitize, like move off of paper. I think we covered that one for sure. Move off
Yeah.
of paper. Find some industry partnerships, right? Collaborate, talk to your peers, truly understand what's happening in the industry, because I think this is an industry approach and not necessarily one particular company trying to solve it for themselves. It's going to take everybody pulling together to figure that out. So I guess that ask is, I always like to say, put egos in a box and then let's figure out how we solve these things as an industry, because it takes, all of the ideas, and be open to AI, be open to dabbling, to try it. I think some of the times we see people who are hesitant to use AI in a business context or in a process context, because it is scary in our industry. But if you start dabbling in it and using it for yourself in your personal time and in some of your personal work that you're doing, you'll get much more comfortable with it. So be open to AI and use the tools that are out there in a safe. But between digitizing AI and understanding what's available in the industry and asking questions, getting involved in communities, getting involved in some of these industry forums, and we need all of the ideas. We need people to speak up and get creative.
And optimistically looking at the technology that we have now, let's say companies that start a tech transfer in the near future. Can you imagine that if they are using the tools that are available right now, do you think it's possible for them to cut several years from the tech transfer process?
I'm of the mindset that we are not too terribly far as an industry from one-click tech transfer.
What does it mean, one click transfer?
Yeah, can you actually digitally transfer from the beginning of the process through the sites, do all of the qualifications and specifications for each site, do the translation, and have it translated into a language that can be consumed by manufacturing? Now, that's a bold statement of one click. What is that one? How long does that one click take? Is probably a better question.
Okay, yeah.
But I think that's we can see the industry going there. You can see us making strides in digitizing records. You can see us making strides in doing some of that translation. There's also quite a few efforts around in standardizing, so creating tools and templates or a common language that we use from step to step. AI is beginning to be more widely accepted, used in a safer space, getting more and more comfortable in the regulated industries with AI. And you start to combine that, it's not outside of the realm of possibilities that we could get to that click tech transfer at some point in the future.
And what would it include? Like, so it sounds magical, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like magical wand, swinging, boom, boom, and then you have everything done, right? But what can be done with it and what cannot? So I'm trying to consider, right? So you have like new facilities, maybe many new suppliers for an equipment. So sometimes you cannot, use the same equipment. Ideally, you use everything the same, right? So then you can just copy paste like everything, like same machine is here and there, the same supplier here and there. Sometimes it's not always possible, right? Because maybe even the layout of the building looks a bit different, and
Yeah.
and where the raw material comes in, and uh, the final product comes out are different. So everything might impact it. So how do you design such a plug and play, one click, that it
Mhm.
takes the right information and outputs the right info?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will always be exceptions. And baking those exceptions in, where you're asking the questions: what are the specifications of the site? What equipment is available? Even from you think about a reliability perspective, is that equipment down? Has it been down for the last 6 months? Like maybe you defined a particular site has these capabilities. Well, those capabilities may not be available in the time frame that you need them available. So building in, a scheduling application where you understand what is available at that site, how did it work last time? What are the things that we can learn for that particular site, so that you have a profile of that site that you can plan for during tech, tech transfer. But there will always be exceptions, and humans will always be in the loop. I mean, you might have if we're talking futuristic, and you picture this, one comprehensive dashboard that shows, as it's moving through the process and where those steps are. There will always be places where the humans are involved and have to ask the questions, and that AI cannot solve. Right? There's going to be a human piece where you call me up and say, Nikki, let's figure this out. Right? And I hope that continues to happen, because that's the humanity piece of our job. But I don't think we're too far out from, maybe one click is a little aggressive, but we're not too far out from cutting those tech transfer times in at least in half.
So yeah, and it's, it's very impactful. Like half, it can be like even 3 years, right? Time it takes you, to
Yeah.
set it up. So that's that's crazy to think about. I hope we will get there, right? And um, I'm interested, right? So you're VP of Marketing and Experience, right? So we're talking about the customer experience, right? So you need to understand what clients need out there, and understand their mindset and their needs. So is it something that do you see that clients or people in the industry who are interested are reaching out to you, or are you doing some research to understand what they need, or they come to you and they just explore, I need this and this, can you help me out? Or is it more exploring what is needed at the moment?
I think it's all of the above. I mean, we work with very closely with our customers. Our software drives their manufacturing process, so we are in the weeds with them, right? We know when they're challenged with something, and they let us know. We also know when things are going very well, and we try to bake that into, next things that we're planning for, or next things that we're researching, primarily in the manufacturing space. But we also get the feedback, from our manufacturing context of what's needed upstream, like what would have been helpful for them to have received earlier, or what information are they missing. Some of the situation that you described for, site specifications, they may be at a site and they get something transferred to them that they can't make. Like, what would have been helpful to know, right, before you get to that point? So we're always asking those questions, or we are embedded with our customers, at every step of the way of, from installing and commissioning software, but also understanding how is it running, right? How is the process going? And so we can build that into the new solutions that we develop. But the input is invaluable from an industry perspective, because we see it from the, okay, we're ready to make this, and we are in the manufacturing process, and we are producing, and we have a deadline, and we have an order, and we have people waiting at the other end for that particular therapy.
If you could maybe share with me two perspectives here, like one from clients that reach out to you, like maybe you see a trend of industry leaders that realize, okay, we need something, they reach out to you, and something that you say, you know what, I we have it, and people just don't realize they need it.
Yeah, good one. I think that the first one, and I think anybody in this industry would say, people are asking to figure out AI. I think everybody knows the appeal of it, and that it can be impactful, but everyone's asking somebody else to figure it out. We want to use AI, right? We want to use AI. What does that mean? We want good, proven use cases where AI has been an enabler of something that they're already trying to do. Maybe there's pipeline acceleration or reliability or uptime equipment. Like, how have we used AI to drive some of those outcomes? I think that's one of the things that anybody, everybody's asking right now of how do I quote unquote use AI and what does that look like? And we ask some of those same questions too. What does that mean from a where are the guardrails? How do we use it? How do we make sure it's enabled, but it's not just AI for the sake of AI? And then your second question about what is something maybe we do that people don't know they need yet. I would say it's related to tech transfer around what we call a transfer hub, which is translating upstream intent down to information that can be consumed at the manufacturing level. But part of what's required there is, understanding standards and building a library, which requires the industry to get together, put our heads together and say, okay, can we settle on a set of standards and tools and templates here and a language that we can all start to use together? Define that first, and then the digital piece of the actual software that does the transfer gets a lot easier. But I don't think that the focus right now of let's get together as an industry and really define those standards and tools and templates and modality libraries. I don't know how badly they need it just yet, but we're getting there.
Okay. And when you're talking about meeting as industries, right? So you mean, forums, you mean regulators. So before, before you release even a solution. So first you need to explore what is needed and what is, possible, what is accepted, what is legal, right? So is this
Yeah.
what we're talking about? That, the difficulty of first coming all together and agreeing, okay, we've been doing this always this way, but it's time to shift, right? So is
Yeah.
that what you're talking about?
And doing it from an industry perspective and not necessarily from a standard for one particular company.
Hmm.
I think that's the differentiator here is coming up with some industry standards that we can all accept. I mean, there have been industry standards for right since the beginning of time, but as we move closer towards more standards in the life sciences space, it's going to require manufacturers to come together and share a little bit in a safe space of what works for them, because then these industry tools can be built and or industry applications can be built around those standards. Otherwise, everybody has their own one-off, right? That has to be reconfigured every time.
And you feel that companies are a bit reluctant to come to those forums, share maybe something that they may consider sensitive, or would you say the industry is quite open at the moment and everybody, are ready to share and they understand that something needs to be changed and um,
I
in
think by nature in our industry, we're a conservative industry,
Mm.
and we have to be. But that also means we're more conservative with information. We're more conservative with the sensitive information that you described. But I've certainly seen more even in the last 2 years of more open conversations in these industry forums. When you think about the work that's going into advanced therapies and cell and gene therapies and the energy that is in that space right now, people coming together to share. But I also see that trend continuing in the more traditional pharmaceutical spaces as well, of people really putting their heads together and sharing in a safe space. Obviously, you don't want to give away your company secrets, and no one would expect that. But it's okay to have a conversation with somebody who you may see as a competitor from a safe industry space.
And this vision of one click tech transfer, it's something that technologically still difficult to do, or would you say it's something that actually from programming perspective, from software perspective, it's possible to create such algorithms, but the bottleneck is actually the acceptance of the process, that it's been heavily moved from human to machine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an automation and controls background engineer, so of course I'm going to say anything can be automated. But the technology that's available today, it's absolutely possible. Is it easy? No, right? It's not easy, but it is absolutely possible. I think one of the harder pieces is, like you said, the acceptance, and then the just the human dynamics around change management. it's hard to accept a totally different way to do something that you've been doing the last 30 years, 40 years, whatever it may be. There's a change management piece to all of this that has to be heavily weighted. When you describe the chief communicator, I think one of that person's or that role or that function's key outcomes has to be driving change. And it's, that is the hardest thing that we do in any of our jobs, because none of us like to change. None of us like to change, myself included, right? It's very uncomfortable for us as humans, but that's a huge piece of it, is how do you get from we've always done it this way to here's this new technology that enables you to do it even better and have it accepted.
Right. And how far are we from this being a reality of the one click? You think it will be
I
here in a few years, or even closer,
I
or
think
maybe
we're within 5 years of it,
5 years?
and maybe even sooner.
Yeah, so that sounds very promising. So I hope we'll get it. And I'm just very curious: is it something that Emerson already has a solution for, and or is it something you're working on, or is it just a vision?
Yeah, we actually we work with an industry consortium on
Mhm.
one-click tech transfer is the name of the consortium. So we're working on a tech transfer solution for industry and working on some of those standards now. So that is in process. Delta V Transfer Hub is what we call that, and it's a way to connect upstream to downstream and do that
Mhm.
in a digital way. So it is happening in real time, and like I said, it's a consortium amongst companies. It's not only an Emerson initiative, which I love. I love this industry partnership and seeing people come together and put ideas out there and challenge each other, and it's this whole ball of figure it out energy is where we are. And so I'm encouraged and I'm hopeful and I'm really excited about the progression that we see there and what's possible, because it is possible. You get the right people in the room, you get the right heads together, you get the right energy on it. It is absolutely possible, especially from a technical perspective right now with all of the tools and code support builders and options that are out there.
Right. And let's say some industry leaders would like to get involved in this and they're still not. What are the main forums? Like how to be part of this group of like-minded individuals in the life science space that want to grow? What are the forums that you're part of, and you encourage, such leaders to join?
Yeah, so we're a member of Bioforum, very active in Bioforum. All the many of the industry conferences and trade shows. I think that many Interfex and ISPE, Advanced Therapies Week. And there's some great communities out there. Bioforum is a fantastic organization. I think most industry leaders are involved with that one. But I mean, there's a countless communities that people can be involved in. LinkedIn is a great community as well, right? I mean, it's the one we all kind of have a go-to, but it's pretty remarkable what's there and who you can connect with and share ideas with. Um, yeah, I mean, I would love to connect with people too. If you don't know where to get started and you're looking for some suggestions on how to get plugged into the industry, you're welcome to reach out to me. If you're listening to this podcast and not sure where to get started, I think those industry conversations are just so valuable to understand what are we working on, what's working, what's not working, what do we want to do next. It also keeps the space from being so lonely. You think about we're solving really, really hard problems, and the risks and the stakes for our industry are so high that we can't move fast enough, right? I mean, I get on my soapbox sometimes of we need to move faster, right? Patients are waiting. We've got to move faster, and how do we move things along? And it's nice to talk to some other people who can, maybe share some different ideas or at least share they're struggling with the same things. That's also a bonus.
Right. Sure. So we'll make sure to leave your LinkedIn profile as well when we post this episode. So you heard it. So feel free to connect with Nikki to explore ideas. So Nikki, before we finalize this talk, is there something that I didn't ask you and you feel it's important, to share, and something that you had in your mind and you think it's important to add to the conversation?
I would just reiterate what I said of just start. It can be totally overwhelming. What we do is difficult. It's like, where do you even start? How do I just start? Like, do something. Find one thing that you can do today to improve the process. Just one. Like, it doesn't have to be this monumental thing where you've overhauled an entire site or you've, retrained 200 people. One thing. Just start with one thing. That would be my ask, is like, just start somewhere. And if you don't know where to start and you want to talk through it, again, I don't have all the answers, but I'll be glad to talk with you, and we will try to work something out. But find that one thing, and start there.
Excellent. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you for coming to the show, having this chat with me. Thank you for Emerson for supporting this conversation and this podcast episode. And I hope it will enlighten people and people who are involved in tech transfer, who know how difficult it is, and it gives them some twinkle of light to know that some revolutionary solutions are coming that could change the way the industry works in this regard. So thank you for sharing this with me. Yeah, and I wish you best of luck in this endeavor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be connected, and I love to be part of this community.
Thanks for listening to the Qualitalks podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star review. If you want to learn more about GMP, please visit us at www.qualistery.com. Stay compliant and see you at the next one.